6.
Wait, Boo didn't make the top 5? What salt-ridden hell have you wrought upon us?
Sorry, guys. With the number of mighty villains in Dragon Ball, someone had to be left out of the top 5. And unfortunately, Boo just doesn't cut it.
It all comes down to the fact that while he's certainly not a bad villain, he can just be kind of boring.
And the worst part is that he doesn't start out that way at all. When Boo's first revealed with his sprightly grin and lighthearted voice belying the mystic monster that he is, it's incredibly unsettling. The entire cast is caught off guard by his appearance, and that alone helps sell how terrifying he truly is. And terrifying doesn't even begin to describe it.
In a quest for universal domination, the evil alien wizard Bibbidi summoned to his aid the Majin Buu. With his power, they mercilessly slaughtered 4 of the 5 Supreme Kais who protected the universe. Boo even absorbing one of them in his conquest, and nearly eliminated Earth. It was thanks to the Eastern Supreme Kai that Bibbidi was destroyed, and Boo left sealed away for eternity.
Or at least would have, if not for his doppelganger/son Babidi, who employs the king of the demon realm to restore the Pink Punisher to full power, crashing the World Martial Arts Tournament to do so, and setting up a chain of events that would push the entire universe to the brink.
And there are a lot of things that separate Boo from previous villains, from his concept to his motives to his overall design. His bubblegum color scheme mixed with an Arabian genie aesthetic all on its own would be enough to fully separate him from his peers. But his jolly attitude and rotund shape are just disarming.
He's essentially a child given superpowers. His love for sweets extends as far as to turn people into literal candy, then devour them on a bender to end all humanity. He wants very little more than pure pleasure, finding both delight in pastries and wanton destruction of a citywide scale.
The best traits about Boo so far, as we've listed, mostly continue through his initial transformation. Though he loses his disarming jolly exterior, his chaotic nature and lust for personal satisfaction at the cost of lives stays true. Super Boo starts off as the next logical step in Boo's evolution, from chaotic neutral to chaotic evil. He now has one true goal in mind, a fighter that will satisfy his needs for battle.
Which actually makes him a fantastic parallel to Goku, a man who hungers for food and battle, sometimes over the better interest of those around him. Unfortunately, this is never really explored within the series itself, but from a meta perspective, it's a facet of Boo that definitely makes him unique. Before his absorption of Piccolo and Gotenks, and we're left with a bland or perfect Cell.
And there's where we come to the crux of the problem with Majin Buu. His chaotic nature and unkillable form makes for an unbelievable force to be reckoned with. But with each evolution, he merely grows less interesting. What started as a unique and unsettling villain turns into yet another run-of-the-mill, arrogant bad guy with destruction as his only goal.
Until we're treated with the final form of Boo, colloquially known as Kid Boo, or Pure Boo if you're a purist. The epitome of chaotic evil within the series. His only concept is death and destruction on a cosmic scale, and in one fell swoop we return to the best parts of Boo. Except not really.
Unfortunately, by the time we reach Pure Boo, we've exhausted the saga as a whole. At a whopping 56 chapters and episodes dedicated entirely to Majin Buu, the most interesting parts of his character have been explored, abandoned, then scrambled back together haphazardly, only to leave us cheering Goku's Spirit Bomb on, not to save the universe, but to save us from the story dragging out any longer.
A lot of this stems from implicit fatigue on the part of Toriyama, as well as rumors of audience backlash over the direction of the story. Toriyama has never been a stranger to writing by the seat of his pants, and it only becomes more apparent as the series goes on. While the rewrites of the Android and Cell arcs ultimately came together, here, we're left with a lot of problems, and they really do drag Boo and his whole saga down as a whole.
All that being said, we still love Boo. If these deficiencies in his character were only less glaring, perhaps he'd be in our top 3.
You know, we didn't even discuss my favorite part of Boo, his relationship with Satan. It's such a precious friendship and comes completely out of nowhere.
He really does help with Satan's character arc, huh? Something I never thought I wanted, but after it was said and done, I'm so happy was part of the series.
Yeah, actually, and Boo in the supporting cast definitely opens up possibilities for some interesting character moments. Speaking of which, well, let's just say get ready for number 5.
5.
Taka, it's your line.
You put a movie villain in the top 5.
Well, he's not just a movie villain.
You're right, he's a movie villain post-GT!
As we've said plenty of times so far, those of you familiar with our last DBcember know that Battle of Gods ranked as our #1 Dragon Ball film. Oh, spoilers, I guess. So you're probably already aware that we have an affinity for the purring purple god of destruction, Beerus.
As previously stated in our Super Villains entry, we're not including Beerus' character moments from Super. This is just Battle of Gods Beerus alone. So, with that out of the way, Beerus is f***ing amazing, and if you disagree with that fact, then you're wrong and probably hate Dragon Ball. Mic drop. Well, I'm not actually going to drop the mic. It's really expensive, so.
What Lanny is trying to say is our selection of Beerus to be in the top 5 had plenty of contributing factors. We're collectively huge fans of his concept. His design is wonderfully unique and full of character. His motivations are fascinating and complex, and his overall personality is fun.
Beerus is a delight. From the moment he awakes from his 39-year-long nap to his final moments trying wasabi for the first time, we're treated to a full-on cartoon character made god of destruction. His expressions are big, his moods are extreme, and his power is overwhelming. He makes for an antagonist with more charm and character than any other movie villain combined.
Now you'll notice Kaiser said antagonist. As alluded to in the Supervillains entry, he's not really a villain, but more a force of conflict for Goku and friends to overcome. But considering his penchant for wholesale genocide and destruction, regardless of whether or not it's his God-given duty, he's really not a good guy. At least not in the majority of the film. He's more comfortable with wiping the Earth and its inhabitants from existence over the smallest infraction.
Including but not limited to, not getting any pudding because Boo is a stingy dick. And his characteristic of supreme childishness could easily come off as irritating if it weren't for the way that Beerus carries himself. He's a form of authority, millions of years old, and far more powerful than the entirety of the canon before and after him. With the exception of his attendant Whis, but we'll get to him.
He can come off as effortlessly cool and yet wildly childish at the flip of a switch, and it all just works. But what's even more impressive than his personality is the concept. With creation, first must come destruction, i.e., he's the guy who demolishes the old gas station in Uptown so they can put in that bitchin' artisan pizza shop. It's his job to wipe away the old so new life can emerge. As such, he's justified in his actions of destruction. Well, to a point anyway.
It's really a moral gray area with Beerus, and that's why he works so well as an antagonist. You know Goku has to win to save the planet, but this is the duty of a god who has outlived him hundreds of thousands of times over. What could have been a boring story about an evil god doing evil things becomes a complex and thrilling romp that expands the lore of the universe.
Also, Whis is a goddamn treat. His majestic, refined, yet totally laid-back and casual nature goes hand in hand with his foodie personality. He's just here for the food. Oh, and storyline time if Beerus goes too bonkers. And when you find out just how powerful he is, the context of his relationship with Beerus, as well as with the rest of the cast, is brought into a whole new light. And the mystery of Whis is both endearing and exciting.
Though you did mention his ability to turn back time. This leads us to Resurrection F. We won't talk about it much here, as by this point they hardly count as antagonists, much less villains, but the film really does just waste them in the second half of the film. However, Whis as a teacher for both Vegeta and Goku is a turn that works perfectly. I'll happily take a saga dedicated to that, thank you very much.
Beerus, on the other hand, has no place in the film and actually actively hurts it by being present in some of the bigger scenes. It sucks away all the tension when you know that someone that outranks both Goku and Frieza is just sitting at the sidelines willing to slap every inch of Frieza's gold-plated shit should he threaten the god's never-ending buffet called Earth. He's also basically there to make the same food jokes over and over, and it honestly gets old.
That being said, Beerus and Whis are phenomenal characters who expanded the lore of the franchise, brought Dragon Ball animation back in a big way, and both offered great complex possibilities for the franchise. Now, if only Super would do more with that.
Who wants some champagne? Anyone? No? Okay, just me then.
4.
Yes, perfection.
Our time-traveling robot Bugman has finally arrived, and with him, 3 whole forms to review and critique. From his insidious entrance to his climactic defeat, this villain made one of the biggest impacts on the franchise both in terms of influence and length. At 57 chapters of the manga and taking up at least 10% of the entire story, he easily cements his spot in the top 4.
But we know what you're thinking. How is the brilliant bioengineered baddie below the top 3? Well, let's first talk about Cell's inception. Remember Kazuhiko Torishima, the guy essentially responsible for Cell's creation?
Don't tell me he whined about Cell's design too, didn't he?
No! Well, not Torishima. In fact, this time it was Toriyama's then current editor, Yu Kondo. Quote Kondo, upon his initial exposure to Cell's first form, "He looks ugly. Of course he can transform." So Toriyama hurried Cell's transformation into his second form, to which Yu Kondo then replied, "This time he looks like a moron, doesn't he? Hurry up and make him into his perfect form." Executive meddling, everyone! For better or for worse.
Toriyama had actually wanted the second form to play a more active role, but Cell's hasty evolution does grace us expediently with his final form that, honestly, is the most iconic of the three. While the horror film aesthetic of his original form is memorable, and his second form is definitely unique. His perfect form is tall, intimidating, and definitely stands out from the previous villains, while still retaining aspects of his previous two forms in a way that all comes together perfectly.
Unlike Frieza, who could change his forms at will, Cell's parasitic evolution requires the sacrifice of others. In his first form, he wipes cities clean of their inhabitants with no remorse, all to add to his own personal power, and to gain perfection, he literally consumes and removes the previous villains of the arc, leaving him the lone, unstoppable essence of evil that would force Gohan to come into his own.
His impact on other characters would certainly be a huge point for him. Goku is urged to bond with his son, Gohan is pushed to new heights that would finally bring him into the true role as hero, the death of Trunks awakens the first true inklings of compassion within Vegeta, and the long-time gap between Piccolo and his former self Kami is finally closed in order to combat this threat.
Not to mention, this is the first time in the history of the series that Goku gives up. Not loses and comes back, but flat out tosses in the towel, leaving Gohan to take up the mantle. Of course, this is with full belief that Gohan will overcome Cell, but for the average viewer, it's utterly shocking to see their hero actually accept defeat.
But something you might notice here is that we've not talked much about his personality, and that's where the cracks in his perfection start to show. Nobody can deny that his initial appearance against Piccolo is dripping with dread and menace, and his insidious nature is on full display throughout the arc as he slips out of one impossible situation to the next, only to overcome almost every one of our heroes.
But when it comes to his motivations and characteristics, nothing really sticks out when he's lined up next to the plethora of big bads that preceded him. It's almost as if the whole shtick of him being made up of other characters' cells works against him, as his final form merely feels like a carbon copy of Frieza, without his patronizing and condescending dialogue and penchant for torture. The Saiyan part of him is a will-used device to help with the creation of the Cell games, and his ability to use other people's techniques does come in handy a couple of times. But by the end of the story, his combination of others' DNA and abilities doesn't really make him all that much more unique.
He does sort of feel more like an obstacle to overcome by the end of the story rather than his own character. However, it's definitely worth mentioning that the actors in the English and Japanese version of the anime, who give him spectacular performances that, much like Frieza, are as much a part of his character as his concept and writing dictate. Damian Clark's evolving cadence and tone leading to a smarmy, pompous, but threatening perfect Cell, and Norio Wakamoto's monstrous depth, texture, and delivery that brings an incomparable presence throughout each form. They're perfect picks, you could say.
And the Father-Son Kamehameha and the transformation into Super Saiyan 2 are monumental moments that ranked high on our first DBcember list. And the transformation into his perfect form, Vegeta's final flash, Goku's sacrifice. You just have so many fantastic scenes and moments to pull from that you can thank, at least partially, to Cell. Also, even the most vitriolic of Bruce Faulkner's haters, Kaiser, agree that the music he created for Cell was at the very least alright and catchy.
To summarize, while Cell's personality may not be exceptionally unique and stand out in comparison to his peers, he's still got a charisma that cannot be denied, and was a conduit for change and growth for every character around him, making for a classic, unforgettable arc.